I will start with something that I wrote about in the book, is that I, through the years, I went to school in Virginia, and through the years, people have asked me where I was from, and I would use the term Oak Harbor. I would say Oak Harbor, and I would say it really because my love for Oak Harbor is immense. I loved the way that Oak Harbor shaped me. Years ago, when this building was the former building before it improved to what we have today, I can remember going in and asking for the history of Oak Harbor. And I was young, and they wouldn't let me sign it out because I was too young. And so I actually had to have my mom come in and sign it out. And back then, it looked like it was ditto paper. You know, the old ditto paper, we didn't have copiers then, and that's all it was like 15 pages that was stapled together. And my mom came and got it for me, and I read it. And that's when I discovered that Oak Harbor was Hartford. And the principles upon which Hartford was founded, if you start looking at the intent and the character of the people that founded this town, that carried on for generations. The people that settled here, and we have names of families who have been here for hundreds of years, right? And we can see the evidence of that. And I've also always have been so impressed with the history of Oak Harbor, and I loved to see all the pictures. I love what the library does in offering that. And it went hand in hand to what I was trying to accomplish. I would always use the term Oak Harbor, and they would look at me, and they would people didn't know where Oak Harbor was, so I would say, well, it's close to Cedar Point. And all of a sudden the light would go on, and they would say, oh, so you're by the lake, and we'd tell these stories. Well, we all know that Oak Harbor is much more than just a small little town by the lake. One thing that I always try to say whenever I do these talks, I've done a few of them, is Oak Harbor wasn't perfect. And I think I try to communicate that in the book. We have flaws like everyone else, right? So it's easy to write stories that are fluffy and make it sound like everything is great and everything is perfect. But the realists in all of us, we know, I mean, there were murders that happened in Oak Harbor years and years ago. A farmer on his tractor comes up and does this and goes back into farming that same night. And so there's a storied history here. And I left Oak Harbor after my sophomore year, and again, as I mentioned earlier, is that it's one of my greatest regrets, because I am so tied to the city and the town and the school, and I played hours and hours of Nerf basketball or sock basketball in my bedroom, and the commentary was Oak Harbor Rockets and David Lee and all these things, and it never happened, and I've always carried that with me a little bit. Okay, little known fact is that when I did leave Oak Harbor, and I did have a conversation with Coach Christie after he cut me after my sophomore year, that I did go on and play my senior year in high school and scored 24 points a game, and grew from 5'2" to 6'3" or 2.5", whatever. And so he cut me a little quick. But anyway, that's another story for another day. But what ended up happening was, when I became a teacher, and then I also at the same time was working as a youth pastor, and I was getting invited to speak at these youth conferences, and I started regurgitating some of the stories of things that happened to me. I can never tell a story about a boy and his dog. I just can't do it. I don't know how to communicate it. All I can ever try to communicate is what happened to me. And so I would tell these stories that I had started writing when I was young as being in the second grade. I used to draw a picture and then write words on the story, and that's how I really started writing these stories. Mike asked me, how do you remember all this stuff? How do you remember this stuff? And I said, you have to understand, I've been writing and rewriting these stories since second grade. And some of these stories that happened to me and things that happened throughout my life. And it's because I do have a speech impediment. As an adult, I fight it. I'm fighting it even as I sit here. But I have what is called involuntary hesitation. It's a form of stuttering. And so I don't do did, although I can do that, okay, and I can get there, okay, especially when I get excited. But what I end up doing, and you probably will catch it if you replay this, you'll catch it, that what involuntary hesitation does is you end up putting words in the wrong spot. So when you would normally write or say something a certain way, I would switch the words up a little bit. And it's something that I've battled my whole life. As I got as an adult and did more speaking and different things, it went away. But you know, every now and then it raises its head up again, and I have to deal with it. So what I have done, and you'll hear me probably tonight do it, is I will substitute a word. And one of the substitute words that I'll throw in there is thing. I'll say thing. For no apparent reason, it'll just jump in there. And so if you hear that, I usually just move on and I don't even think about it. And my family's used to it. And so, you know, I am often asked if these stories are true. And I will tell you without any hesitation, as I look all of you in the eye, that every aspect of this story is true. Now I will tell you that these stories are seen through my eyes, okay? And sometimes we all know that when you look at a story and you see it from your own perspective. And so sometimes, you know, that is a blessing and a curse, okay? But it's one of those things, but all of these stories are true. There are a few stories that I've written that I will tell you I've changed the names, right? The reason that I changed names is there are certain people that they don't need the rest of their life to be documented in some book somewhere about something that they may have done or didn't do. But I do leave some names in that are real. One of the names, an interesting story is, if you read my first book, I talk about a girl by the name of Church Street, okay? And I promised and vowed that I would never reveal who Church Street was because I didn't want to embarrass her. Like the last thing she ever needed was to know that I was madly in love with her all through my elementary school years. And I didn't want to embarrass her. So flash forward, I am in a book signing and I had a good number of people there and I'm signing books and I'm talking to people and whatever, and I look up and there she is. and I didn't know exactly what to do because I didn't know if she was going to say, you know, listen, nobody better find this out or whatever. And then I wasn't sure that she knew she was Church Street. I mean, that was kind of one of those things. Like she had to, because
I bet she
do the math, right? But anyway, what has been interesting is that we've been able to reconnect again and be able to, you know, the friendship that is there. And we talk about that's in a story I called A Gentleman Never Tells, and because I will not confirm nor deny in this setting whether or not she was my first kiss. Only her and I will know if that's the case. But actually, we have been able to reconnect, and how she actually reconnected is that she works where my daughter works. And she, out of the clear blue sky, they had been friends on Facebook, and then she asked my daughter, "Is David Lee your father?" And she said, "Yes." Well, then my daughter called me and I'm like, and what was unique about that is that was right after I finished writing that story. And so it was very unique, on that, but, you know, we talk about growing up in Oak Harbor and the stories that I tried to tell. I wrote constantly, and it's something that I hid because I was embarrassed. And the reason that I don't know why necessarily I was embarrassed, but I would hide my notebooks. And I would write every night. I would go upstairs and write. And you know, my mom and dad, my mom particularly, but thought I was up playing with my Matchbox cars and whatever, but I was up there writing stories and telling stories and things that I was angry about because I had a hard time verbalizing it. And so I wrote these stories, and I had notebooks and notebooks of stories, and I wrote about everything. And I was very close to my grandfather, and my dad was a truck driver, drove truck for 48 years, and he was never home. He left on Sunday nights and came back on Fridays. Took care of his own truck, so he had to work on the truck on Saturday and turn around and left again on Sundays. And that was my life. So my mom, who just passed away this past October at 2 weeks shy of 90 years old, but she was 4 foot nothing, but bigger than life to me. She raised 4 kids and 3 boys, and all she had to do was jiggle the broom closet handle, and we knew that it was time to straighten out. Okay, I don't ever remember my mom ever striking me with the broom. It was the fear of it that straightened me out. But I continued to write very close to my grandfather, as I mentioned before, and I happened to be in Michigan, and my mother called me and told me that my grandfather was close to passing away, and that I needed to come right away. And unfortunately, there was a decision made that it was Christmas Eve. And they said, well, let's just wait and we'll leave after Christmas Day and go back. Maybe he'll make it. And he passed away a couple of hours after I got off the phone. I was very angry, very upset because I wanted to see him. I was very, very close to him, as I mentioned. And so, what I ended up doing is, and I'm going to reveal a secret tonight that nobody knows, okay? My family just found out about this at my mom's funeral. I took all of my notebooks and I gave them to my grandfather. And I put the pen down. I apologize. I didn't write again for 25 years. I never did anything except sign my name. They buried my notebooks with my grandfather. And with my Waterford pen that he had bought me to write. If you've ever had a Waterford pen, you'll know. But it was the only thing I could do. And I didn't write. And then for 25 years, again, until about 2009, I started waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning. And suddenly I had this urge to write again. And I didn't know what to do, right? I had 4 teenagers at home, trying to figure all that out, trying to deal with all of that, and trying to figure out how do I write again, and all of these things. And so what I ended up doing is I jumped on in the age of computers, and I found a blog, and what a blog was, and I started writing some stories and starting to retell some of the stories before I forgot them. One of the things that I didn't tell you before is that my grandfather was a writer, not by trade, but my grandfather would write me letters, when he would go to Florida. And I would remember running to the mailbox, and it would be Master David Lee. That's how he would send me letters. And I have these letters to this very day. And it was letters from Grandpa. And so what I ended up doing is, with my blog, is I initially called it Letters from Dad. And my intent was for no one to ever read these stories, ever. My intent was to put them someplace so that when I passed away, they could possibly find them, and maybe my kids or my grandkids would want to read them. And so I just started writing, and I started, like I said, letters from Dad, and I labeled them that way. And I did that for 6, 7, 8 months, and then in March of 2009, I lost one of my closest friends. One of my closest friends as an adult had passed. And, you know, it caused me to pause and to think about, you know, not just letters, but I also started thinking about my legacy. What do you leave behind? Because it's ultimately, we're all gonna leave a legacy, right? Some of it good, some of it not so good, right? And so I started to rethink some of the things that I was writing. 2 months later, I lost another one of my closest friends. And so my closest friend as an adult died in March. My closest friend after I left Oak Harbor, and my closest friend as a teenager, as an older teen, he died in May. And then my childhood friend, who I had grown up from the time that my earliest recollection until I was 15 or 16 years old, passed away in June. And so I had lost 3 pillars of my life within a 4 or 5 month period. And just reeling from that. And then I started to change some of the way that I wrote. It wasn't just writing stories to my kids or letters to my kids. I started telling more stories about growing up. I started to remember stories with Brian Blakely, which is who I'm referencing as my childhood friend, okay? And then Steve Shern was my older teen friend, and then Bob Merrick was my closest adult friend. And so I started remembering stories about Brian, so I started telling stories about Brian, just writing stories. And I ended up changing my blog to be called Footprints of a Legacy Left Behind. And one of the reasons that I changed that was because of that whole issue of that we leave a legacy. And we leave a legacy upon which we, you know, there's some footprints that I'm not so proud of in my life, right? And so I looked back and I thought, well, how can I change this? I want to be able to tell stories. I want to be able to talk to my kids and others that life isn't perfect. You know, there's things that happen. And so I just started writing those type of stories and started doing that. I wrote a story that was called It's a Long Way to Cleveland When You're 15. And it's a story about Tea Gardens Pool. And the story is basically I get there and there's a new girl there. She's visiting, and if you've read the story, it goes on, and at the end of the day, she leaves after whatever it was, 4 weeks, and then I lose all contact with her. And it's just, I held onto that letter for years and years and years and years, a letter that she gave me when she left, that she was telling me that she was leaving. I thought I was going to be able to see one more day. Now, we never held hands, we never kissed. It wasn't that type. We did kiss. I got to clarify. We did at the end of the day, but it wasn't like that kind of relationship. It was something different. And I wrote this story, and I just put it on my blog, and next thing I know, it goes viral. And I don't know why. And I mean, like, hundreds and hundreds and thousands of hits, people reading this story. And that's when somebody, after that, that's when somebody says, listen, you need to put these stories into a book form. And so that's what I ended up doing. I ended up gathering some of these stories, and I have many, many stories. Some of them start sounding similar, so I had to cut some and try to do that, and you know, you try to write these stories that I want people to, I never write to just tell a story. I want to try to move you. I want to try to have you feel what I thought, or feel what I felt, think what I thought, I guess is a better way to word that. And because I wanted people to go on a journey with me and kind of figure out what it was like. I wrote a story about my brother dying and getting killed in a car accident. And one of the things, the story that needs to be written, which I'm planning on, I am going to be writing a third book. Okay, so that's the other thing I'm announcing. I am writing a third book about Oak Harbor, but I will tell you that it's going to be a little different because A, my mother is now passed away, and I can tell some stories without getting in trouble with her. And B, I think the statutes of the limitations have. I don't think Larry St. Clair or Bill Paulson, God rest his soul, is going to come arrest me at this point. So there's going to be some stories along those lines, which we all have them.
Be careful about Larry.
One of the stories that I want to tell is that a little known fact that people don't realize about the city, about the town of Oak Harbor. And it talks about, I touch on it a little bit in my first book about the resiliency of this town. And what people don't realize is that from about 1964 to this day, Oak Harbor has lost between 60 and 75 teenagers. And it's a story that needs to be told. And I had a couple of Oak Harbor, people from Oak Harbor that have reached out to me and have said that they were close to some of these people. You know, my brother, my cousin, our next door neighbor was killed on November 5th. Less than a year later, 5 seniors were killed coming home from Pena County. We can go back and it's a dangerous thing to write about, though, simply because you don't want to leave anybody out. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to do the research, and it's hard because some of the parents of these teenagers have now gone, have now passed. And I personally don't know who to talk to. I remember when Scott Appling and Scott Harder and Tom Appling, I think that was the name, in 74, they passed away. And what was interesting about that is that they were asking me about my brother's death, just not too long before they passed away. And I mean, Oak Harbor we just had 2 this past January of kids, and it's just amazing the amount of children, teenagers, that have lost their life from our little town. More so than I don't think people really understand or really can comprehend how much loss our town has suffered. And, you know, which leads to kind of a side story. Leads me to another story, because I've had a couple of interesting events happen to me since I have written the books. Now, I have always been one that has enjoyed my being anonymous, not being noticed, not being recognized, right? And, you know, I kind of enjoyed that. And I kind of enjoyed the fact that I'm a ghost everywhere I go, because there's people who look at me sometimes previously, and they go, you look familiar. And usually, and I've written about that, I was always Linda Lee's little brother. I was always the brother of the boys that were killed at the end of Benton Street. I was, you know, that was even some of my reason why I wanted to leave Oak Harbor, because I never really had any of my own, what I felt was my own identity. So I would always, you know, But people would always do that. Are you Jim Lee's brother? Are you, you know, they would do these kind of things. And so they really didn't recognize me too much. Few people would. Flash forward after I released my first book, I published my first book, and I am in the middle of the Apple Festival. Being able to enjoy my own, being anonymous, just enjoying my apple dumpling and not having to deal with, you know, with anything. And I was at the corner of Water Street and Church Street, which, you know, that's the hub. That's where there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people in that area. And I am standing there with my wife in mid-bite, and I see the sea part, the crowd, and I see her coming. And she was 150 yards away, but there was something that just happened unique that day, because it kind of, you know, the sea kind of parted, and she's locking eyes on me. And usually in my life, I don't, you know, I usually have I'm gonna run, right? 'Cause I don't know what's gonna happen, I don't know what she's gonna, but I could tell she was coming for me, right at me. And she gets about 10 steps from me, and she just starts sobbing, and just sobbing. And I'm sitting there, and I don't know what to do. And I mean, I'm like a stranger. I'm, you know, in this town, nobody knows me. And here's this woman who is sobbing and drenching the front of my coat. And I was trying to understand what she was trying to say to me. And she was thanking me for mentioning about her son that had passed away. And she had told me that she thought that everybody forgot. So it ties back to this one chapter, one area of the book that I want to write in the next year or so. Another event that happened to me was I was at a funeral in Robinson's funeral home, and it was packed. The line went clear out, and I am standing in the middle of the funeral home trying to pay my respects to this family. You know, I didn't come to get noticed. Everybody's talking, you know, so it's not quiet. I mean, it's fairly, you know, everybody's having conversation. And I'm standing there, and a woman about 6 or 7 people ahead stops, turns around and looks, and it says, "Hey, you're that guy that wrote that book." And it was dead silence in the middle of the funeral. And so I'm sitting there going, I don't know what to do. I'm like, I don't know, we could talk about this some other time. But we ended up having a conversation. But I've had some interesting experiences as that's related to that. And I guess that, you know, at the end of the day, I am trying to preserve the history for my kids, for my grandkids. You know, we talk about the legacy left behind, and because I named my blog Footprints of a Legacy Left Behind, that's why I got footprints in a small town. That's kind of, I wanted to make the tie into that, because I still drive around this town. I'll leave here tonight and I can drive by my old neighborhood and I'll see my footprints. Now, not physical footprints, but I can walk those, you know, that sidewalk, and I know, you know, I was there. That was part of that. I can drive by the house that I grew up in, which, is another secret, okay, because I've never revealed this before. It was 404 Walnut Street, okay, and that, you know, the house doesn't look too much different from the day we moved out of it in 1973. The front door is still exactly like it. All of us wanted to live there. We wanted to stay there. And they offered it to my parents in 1973 for $8,000. And my dad turned it down, said it was too much money. And to this very day, we wish we would have, because that's memories of my brother, memories of all of that were made in that home. And I don't call very many places where I've lived home, but when I drive past there, it's home. You all can experience that to a certain degree. You know, you know what home is, and you know, so so we just lived in other houses after that. We lived there until 1973. I guess, we talk about what's coming. I do want to write another book. I'm hopeful that, I will tell you that the first book is still selling. It's amazing to me. I've never paid for advertising it. It was, I didn't write the book to get, I don't consider, I love to write. I've never said that I'm a good writer, right? The only thing that I truly attempt to do, I do have a few good editors, although, like I said, if you find the book, you will see that there's some grammar errors, but that's true of any book. But you could spend forever trying to fix all of it. But again, I do want to write another book about Oak Harbor, and I do want to tell maybe a little bit different. I wrote the second one different than I wrote the first one. I wanted to be more conversational. And now, is everything word to word exactly what happened? I wrote a story in there about a day in the life, and it talks about the lunchroom situation and all these things that happened. And they didn't all happen on the same day. I write it as if it did, but you just can't tell that story. You have to kind of get it concise and try to tell the story and try to get the gist of what it was like to be there and to do that. But all of those things, all those events truly happened, and I truly was enamored with Libby Kilmer. Libby ran the French fry place, and I can remember not being able to even speak when she would squeal like a dolphin. Yes, I could, but I could not speak when she spoke to me. I also want to talk a little bit more about influences. One of the things I dedicated the book to Vicki Siebert. This is my last book. One of these, Vicki passed away. It was interesting because I had lost contact with Vicki, and then I wrote the first book, and I kind of tracked her down on Facebook, stalked her. Might not be the right term, but that's probably what I did, and stalked her and found, and I asked her if I could send her a book. And I simply wanted I wanted to acknowledge how much I appreciated her. And she actually stayed in contact with me almost until the very end and encouraged me to continue to write. And unfortunately, she didn't get to read the second book. But I did dedicate it to her. And I want to talk about those influences a little bit more. I want to talk, I want to share some stories of maybe some, I don't want it to be deep, dark, and depressing, but I also want to talk about a few more things that were tough to swallow, tough to handle. The first time I ever heard the word AIDS came from a friend of mine from Oak Harbor, and I didn't know what it was. And things like that I want to tell these stories. Again, I am glad if people enjoy the stories. I have had some wonderful, wonderful comments and a lot of people reaching out to me. I also have had people who have contacted me and told me that my writing was the stain on the white shirt of society. Okay, so I know that not everybody loves every story that I wrote, right? Which is it's fair. It's okay. I kind of laugh at that. I guess one of the things that I want to do before I leave is I want to read a portion of one of my favorite things that I wrote, and it is just something that I ended the chapter on in my first book, and it's one of those things that when I wrote it, it brought me immense satisfaction. And not everything I write brings me that, right? You talk about, in my second book, one of the things that I really want to touch on and is failure. That, and again, I don't wanna be a downer on things, but I wanna talk about failure and how we deal with failure, how we deal with stuff, which ties into, things not going our way or hurt, and I wanna talk about those things a little bit. One of the things that when we talk about failure is, in my second book, I tell a story about Pam. Pam is my wife. And Pam has been my wife for 23 years. However, there was a period of time when she wasn't my wife. And we reconnected after I went through a free fall in my life. And one of the things that is very important to me is my faith. And I had the unfortunate experience of going through a divorce that I did not want. And I couldn't stop it. And I ended up doing a career change. I ended up losing my ministry. I ended up losing just about every friend I had in this world. And it took me a long time to recover. And about 5 years after my divorce, I ran into Pam and rekindled something I did not know. She had gone through a divorce as well. I had had no contact with her at all, didn't know where she was at, didn't have any idea. And now we're closing in on 23 years of marriage. And so one of the things that one of my projects that I'm currently working on is I have a series of books coming out that are not about Oak Harbor, although they do tell some Oak Harbor stories, is a book. It's a 3-book series. The first one's going to be coming out in the next, as soon as I get, it's going to be so soon. I'll just leave it at that. But the book is called All That Is Within Me. And these are going to be stories about faith, about inspiration. I won't get into too much to preach about it in it. So, but it is something that I want to share about my faith. My faith is very, very important to me. And I know what it's like to go through where you lose that. You lose that ability simply because in the circles that I was in, divorce was not something that's accepted on any level. And I lost everything. I lost my ministry. I lost it all. But there's life after it, and there's life that can be that you can recover. And there's things that can be done. And I currently am full time working in a church in Northwest Ohio, a large church, and been there for 1.5 years after retiring in 2019. From my previous job, and I love it. I enjoy it. I'm deeply involved, and I'm grateful for having an opportunity to be able to do that. And so, with that being said, those will be a series of 3 books, volume 1, 2, and 3, and then I will have another Carver book will come out sometime in that realm. I have a bunch of stories that I'm still working on, and so with that, I'd like to just kind of wrap up a little bit. I want to read this portion of it because it is something that is still very close to me. I will try to read it out loud without stuttering and without getting too emotional when I read it. But it is one that brings me. It's why I wrote the book. It's the reason. And so, it says, when I reminisce about my childhood summers, I think of the smell of the sun and sweat on my skin after playing outside all day long. I think of the sizzle of the sparklers and the big colorful explosions of fireworks and their sulfuric scent lingering in the air on July 4th celebrations at Veterans Park. I think of the smell of chlorine and the bloodshot eyes from swimming at Tea Gardens Pool. And I think of cupping my small hands around fireflies and dropping them into mason jars. Little pieces of summer I wish I could treasure forever. I can still remember the way my heart would race when I knew it was game day. I miss the feeling of pure joy of being flanked by your best friends on our bikes, experiencing our first taste of freedom, and being able to take ourselves anywhere within the town limits. Powered by the adrenaline pumping through our veins with each spin of our silver spokes. I wish I could have bottled all those feelings all those years ago, like those fireflies in a mason jar. To once again feel the youthful freedom and the delicious possibility of how, on any given night, it might end. I'd open that lid and breathe in the smallest sample to make it last. In closing, this has been a wonderful experience for me. Can you imagine going back to your roots and reliving your youth? You see yourself grow up, and you see yourself make mistakes. You see your heart get broke, and you experience the loss of loved ones. However, you get to relive the good things and the friendships that were a big part of your life. And that's what I have relived by writing these stories. My hope is that some of you that took the time to read my books will come away with the appreciation of another place and time. Maybe your memories have stirred and you can relate to my journey, to once again find the footprints of your youth. I hope that you once again feel the freedom of that last day of school, stretched across 3 blissful summer months. And I hope your memories will allow you to relive growing up with a deep appreciation of summer nights that can never be as good as they were when you were young, especially in the confines of our sleepy little town. A place where your footprints can still be found. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Very nice.